Forget everything you have seen in Hollywood blockbusters. You have been sold a polished myth about 300 heroes so that you would never learn the truth about what actually happened. The story we are about to uncover is not an epic of valor. It is a chronicle of madness, cowardice, monstrous command errors, and animalistic terror. Why do history textbooks prefer to stay silent about the Battle of Plataea, even though it was this battle, not Thermopylae, that saved Western civilization? Because the truth is too uncomfortable. Here, Greece's greatest army does not perform feats of heroism, but goes mad from thirst, trying to drink its own urine. Here, Spartan generals weep from powerlessness, while their men are shot down like targets in a shooting gallery. Here, victory is won not through noble duels, but through a massacre that looked more like the industrial slaughter of livestock, where prisoners were not taken, but butchered by entire nations. You will learn about the night of great chaos, when elite troops turned into an unruly mob, and how a single stone thrown at a commander's feet nearly doomed all of Hellas. This is a tale of a triumph that the victors themselves are ashamed of. Watch this until the end to see the true face of ancient war, stained with mud and blood, about which it is customary to remain silent. Welcome to a reality that is more terrifying than any fiction. You were sold a beautiful lie. The Hollywood myth about a handful of half-naked heroes saving civilization in a fiery gorge. You have seen this movie. You know the shot. King Leonidas screaming in the face of death, a spear piercing the air. Credits. The end. Catharsis. You were told that the sacrifice of the 300 Spartans stopped the Persian machine. But look out the window. Look at the smoke rising above the horizon. Breathe in that air. It smells of burning, not victory. The truth is that Thermopylae did not stop the war. It did not even slow it down. It was merely a bloody comma in the sentence the Persian Empire passed on Greece. Leonidas is dead. His head is mounted on a stake, and his body is rotting somewhere in the road dust. The 300 Spartans are dead. Their bones are bleaching in the sun while the world continues to collapse. It is the year 479 BC, and the situation is not just bad, it is catastrophic. Imagine a morning when you wake up and realize the nightmare is not over. The great King Xerxes has left, yes. He took part of the fleet and returned to Asia to drink wine and rule the world. But he left his knife here. The sharpest, rustiest, and cruelest knife in his arsenal. The general Mardonius. And Mardonius did not stay alone. An army stayed with him. Not the colorful extras from legends who die in bunches from a single shield bash. No. The professional elite stayed with him. The best killers of Asia.
Cavalry whose trampling makes the earth shake.
Infantry that has marched from India to the Aegean Sea, leaving scorched earth behind them. How many of them are there? Herodotus will tell you 300,000. Modern historians will grimace and say, fewer, maybe 100,000, maybe 80. But what difference does it make to you if you are standing in formation and in front of you is a living sea of steel and leather stretching beyond the horizon? 300,000 or 100,000. These are just numbers. But reality is a forest of spears that blocks out the sun. Reality is the realization that for every Greek hoplite, there are 3, 4, 5 professional enemy soldiers who eat your bread, sleep with your women, and pray to foreign gods on your land. Greece is on its knees. Athens, the greatest city of antiquity, the cradle of democracy, has been burned to the ground. Twice. The Acropolis has been turned into black ruins. The statues of gods are smashed, temples desecrated. The sacred olive tree, the symbol of the city, is charred. The inhabitants of Athens are refugees, huddled on the island of Salamis, looking across the strait at the ashes of what was once their home. They have no roof over their heads, they are running out of food, and, worst of all, they are running out of hope. Because the winter was long. Mardonius is not just a warrior, he is a smart predator. He spent the winter in the Thessalian plains, fattening his horses on Greek grain. He waited. He played a diplomatic game, offering the Athenians gold and power if they betrayed the rest of Greece. Why die for a ruined city when you can become a governor for the king? The temptation of betrayal hangs in the air, thicker than the smell of decaying bodies. Fear has gripped Hellas. This is not the heroic fear that makes you grip your sword tighter. It is a sticky, cold horror that makes your arms drop.
Ask yourself, could you stand still, knowing that your death would change nothing?
Thermopylae proved one terrible thing. You can fight like a lion, you can die like a god. But if there are too many enemies, they will simply step over your corpse and move on. The myth of Spartan invincibility has cracked. Yes, they killed many Persians, but the Persians are still here. They occupy Boeotia, they control the north, they feel like masters. The Greek alliance is bursting at the seams. Every city-state thinks only of itself. This is not a justice league. This is a jar of spiders united by only one thing: the prospect of being crushed by a Persian boot. The atmosphere of this time is a hangover. A heavy, agonizing hangover after the intoxicating myth of one's own exceptionalism. The Greeks suddenly realized that they are mortal, that their gods are silent, that their vaunted phalanx can be flanked, surrounded, and shot down with arrows from a safe distance. Mardonius knows this. He despises the Greeks. To him, they are squabbling children fighting amongst themselves while the adults divide their inheritance. He writes letters full of poison and threats. He maneuvers. He is ready to deliver the final blow that will turn Hellas into just another satrapy of the empire, where democracy will be remembered as a foolish joke. Among this chaos, dirt, and despair, somewhere in the south, behind a narrow isthmus, sits Sparta. Silent, sullen, selfish Sparta. The only force capable of challenging the Persian machine. But the Spartans are in no hurry. They are building a wall. While Athens burns, while northern Greece groans under the yoke of occupiers, the best warriors in the world are mixing mortar and laying stones, hoping to sit it out behind fortifications on the isthmus. They believe they can lock up the Peloponnese and throw the rest of Greece to the wolves. Is this betrayal? Is this pragmatism? Is this cowardice disguised as strategy?
But history is a mistress with a sense of irony.
She will not let anyone sit it out. The mechanism has been started. The gears of fate, lubricated by Leonidas's blood, begin to turn, grinding up human lives. Summer is approaching. The fields are drying out, becoming the perfect staging ground for cavalry. Mardonius moves south. He is coming to finish what Xerxes started. And this time there will be no narrow gorge where one can hide their small numbers. This time they will have to go out into the open field. Into a field where death comes not with the face of a hero, but with 1,000 faceless masks. Greece holds its breath. Livestock is slaughtered in temples, trying to bargain for at least a drop of luck from the gods through the entrails of victims. But the goat's liver is black, and the priests hide their eyes. The time of heroes has passed. The time for butchers has arrived. And while politicians argue and generals draw maps in the sand, ordinary people sharpen their swords, knowing that this summer will be the last for most of them. The shadow of a gigantic threat has covered the land, and in this shadow, A battle is ripening that will either save the West or bury it forever. A battle you forgot in order to remember a beautiful fairy tale about 300 dead men. Welcome to reality. Welcome to the year 479. Welcome to the hell that preceded Plataea. While the rest of Greece was choking on blood and ash, Sparta was busy with a very important matter. It was stacking stones. On the narrow isthmus separating the Peloponnese Peninsula from the mainland, work was in full swing. The best warriors in the world, bred to kill with one blow, turned into masons. They were building a wall, a high, thick, insurmountable wall. It was a monument not to courage, but to the greatest selfishness in the history of antiquity. Spartan logic was cold as the steel of their Xephos swords. Let Athens burn. Let Boeotia and Thessaly become slaves. Let the whole world go to hell. The main thing is that Sparta survives behind its wall. They planned to lock the gates and watch the Persian tide break against the stones without getting their sandals wet. You thought Sparta was the shield of Hellas? No. At that moment, Sparta was its main problem. The Athenians, having lost their homes, temples, and land, watched this construction with powerless rage. Their ambassadors arrived in Lacedaemon not to ask, but to demand. Picture the scene. Dusty, tired Athenian diplomats stand before the ephors, the old conservative rulers of Sparta. The Athenians speak of honor, of alliance, of oaths. And the Spartans? They are celebrating the Hyacinthia, a religious festival. Dances, sacrifices, hymns to Apollo. We cannot fight. We have a holiday, they say. It was the perfect excuse, polished over centuries.
A bureaucratic no that cost thousands of lives.
But Athens had one trump card left, a card that could flip the board. The fleet. The most powerful fleet in the region. And then the Athenian ambassadors threw their ultimatum on the table. It sounded not like a request for help, but like a blackmailer's threat. If you, Spartans, do not come out to fight in Boeotia, we will make peace with Mardonius. We will give him our ships, and then your wall on the isthmus will become the most expensive and useless pile of stones in the world. Because the Persians will simply bypass it by sea and land in your rear. The silence that hung after these words was heavier than any shield. It was a moment of truth. The Spartan ephors, those cunning old men, suddenly understood the simple arithmetic of war. The wall is useless without the fleet. The fleet belongs to Athens. If Athens betrays them, Sparta dies. Heroism has nothing to do with it, only cold calculation. Survival.
And then happens what historians still call a miracle, and cynics call a brilliant special operation.
The night changes everything. The morning after the ultimatum, the Athenian ambassadors came to the ephors to say their final goodbye and announce the breaking of the alliance. They were ready to spit in the faces of their allies and leave, but the ephors met them with stone faces and a strange smirk. "What are you worried about?" they asked. "Our army is already on the march. They are already at the border, in Orestion, marching to meet the barbarians." The Athenians were stunned. How? When? At night, while the ambassadors slept, while Persian spies, of whom there were many in the city, dozed, the gates of Sparta opened. Out of them walked not just an army, out of them walked a Leviathan. Forget about the 300 Spartans. That was just a reconnaissance in force. Now Sparta fielded everything it had. 5,000 Spartiates. 5,000 full citizens, the elite of the elite, each of whom had trained since childhood
to be the perfect killing machine. Never before and never after did Sparta field so many of its sons. But that wasn't all. Next to each Spartiate walked 7 helots, 7 slaves armed as light infantry, carrying shields, provisions, and hatred in their hearts. 35,000 helots, and another 5,000 perioikoi, free inhabitants of Laconia. 45,000 men. And that is just from Sparta. Together with allies, the Greek army streaming toward the isthmus numbered, according to Herodotus, about 110,000 men. 110,000! Can you imagine that roar? It is not the clatter of 300 horses, it is an earthquake. The rhythmic, heavy beat of tens of thousands of feet from which dust rises to the heavens and veils the sun. Leading this armada was not a king. Leonidas was dead. His son Pleistarchus was still a child. The army was led by a regent, Pausanias, a man destined to become the most controversial figure of this war. He was not a hero in the usual sense. He was ambitious, cruel, arrogant, and dangerous. He craved glory that would eclipse the feat of his uncle, Leonidas. He did not need a beautiful death. He needed total victory. Pausanias looked at this army not as defenders of freedom, but as an instrument of his personal power. And this instrument was frighteningly effective. Imagine that night march. No torches, no songs, complete silence, broken only by the clang of bronze and the creak of leather. Spartan discipline in action. 5,000 masters and 35,000 slaves marching in one formation to kill a common enemy. A paradox that makes the brain explode. Slaves going to die for the freedom of their masters so that they can continue to keep them in slavery. But in the face of the Persian threat, even class hatred recedes into the background. Or maybe the Helots simply feared Spartan whips more than Persian swords. Who knows? History has not preserved the voices of slaves. It preserved only the tramp of their feet. Mardonius, sitting in Athens, learned of the Spartan deployment too late. His spies failed. The element of surprise worked. The Persian commander realized the game had changed. The sleeping giant had woken up. The Spartans did not just leave home. They are coming for his head. And they are coming not to die, as at Thermopylae. They are coming to kill. Mardonius immediately makes a decision. Athens is no longer needed. The city is put to the torch again, this time permanently. Walls are demolished, temples blown up. The Persians leave. They retreat into Boeotia, to the plains around the city of Plataea, to where their cavalry can spread out, to where there is room for maneuver. Mardonius chooses the battlefield. He invites the Greeks into his trap. "You want to fight?" he seems to say. "Come to me, on level ground, where my horses will trample you into the mud." The Greek army, under the command of Pausanias, moves north. Athenians join it. 8,000 hoplites under the command of Aristides, a man with a reputation for crystal honesty, the complete opposite of the cunning Pausanias. Two completely different forces, a land oligarchy and a maritime democracy, welded together by fear and necessity. They hate each other, but they hate the Persians a little more. They pass through ruins, through burned villages, through fields where unharvested crops are rotting. The air is thick with heat and flies, water is scarce, but they march. Step by step, phalanx after phalanx, a bronze river flows toward Kithyron, the mountain range separating Attica from Boeotia. When they climbed the pass and looked down into the valley of the Aesopus River, many lost their breath. Below, as far as the eye could see, sprawled the Persian camp. Thousands of tents. A huge wooden fort built by Mardonius. And people. An uncountable number of people. The glint of gold, the colorful clothes of Medes, Bactrians, Indians, Saka. The entire East gathered here to give the final battle to the West. Pausanias stopped the army on the slopes of the mountains. To go down to the plain was suicide. Mardonius's cavalry would have torn the phalanx to pieces before it could even form up. The Greeks took positions on the heights, where it was difficult for horses to operate. They clung to the rocky slopes like mountain goats. Two armies froze opposite each other. Above, 100,000 Greeks encased in bronze, exhausted by thirst and internal strife. Below, the huge, motley horde of the empire, led by one of the best tacticians of his time. Between them, the valley of the Asopus River, no man's land, the death zone. No one wanted to make the first move. Mardonius waited for the Greeks to come down. Pausanias waited for the Persians to come up.
A staring contest began, the stake of which was the fate of an entire continent. But it was not just a game. It was torture by waiting. The sun beat down mercilessly. Water in waterskins heated up to the temperature of urine, and nerves were stretched like a bowstring before a shot. In this silence, broken only by the neighing of horses below and prayers above, a battle was born that was supposed to wash away the shame of Thermopylae. But for now there was only dust, sweat, and the heavy gaze of two predators ready to tear out each other's throats. Welcome to the antechamber of hell. Welcome to the foot of Kithairon. It was the strangest battle in history, a battle that wasn't. Imagine two giant armies frozen in a deadly clinch, but not striking a blow. 110,000 Greeks clung to the rocky spurs of Mount Kithairon like shipwreck survivors washed ashore. Below, in the wide and fertile valley of the Asopus River, an ocean of Persian power unfolded. This was not just geography. It was a tactical chessboard where any wrong move meant checkmate. And checkmate here was death. The situation is simple and murderous at the same time. The Greek phalanx is the tank of antiquity. A wall of shields, a forest of spears, a monolithic mass capable of demolishing everything in its path. But this tank has no tracks. It is clumsy. If the phalanx descends to the plain, the Persian cavalry will flank it, get in its rear, break the formation, and shoot the hoplites like partridges. Therefore, the Greeks sit on the mountain. There, among stones and thorny bushes, cavalry is useless. There they are safe. But there is no water there. Mardonius is no idiot either. He sees the Greeks. He knows that if he sends his infantry to storm these steep slopes, the Spartans and Athenians will kick them back down. The Persians have short spears, wicker shields, and no heavy armor. In close combat on a narrow path, one Spartan is worth 10 Persians. Mardonius understands this. He needs the plain. He needs these stubborn, iron-clad mules to come down to him in the valley. And the staring contest begins. Day 1. Day 2. Day 3. Have you ever worn 66 pounds of bronze under the July sun of Greece? Imagine it. You are wearing a linen cuirass soaked in glue that does not breathe. On your head is a helmet turning into an oven in which your brains slowly boil. Sweat floods your eyes, stinging and salty. Dust stuffs your mouth. You stand shoulder to shoulder with your neighbor, smell his scent, the scent of fear, unwashed body, and garlic. And you wait. You look down at the Asopus River, where enemies water their horses, bathe, and laugh. And your throat is so dry that your tongue feels like sandpaper. This is not a heroic epic. This is torture. Mardonius plays with the Greeks like a well-fed cat with a cornered mouse. He does not attack with full force.
Why? Time works for him. Behind him is the whole empire. Convoys with food, free access to water. The Greeks have empty stomachs and the scorching sun. The Persian commander begins psychological warfare. He sends detachments of mounted archers to the foot of the hills. They do not engage in battle. They gallop up to shooting range, release a cloud of arrows, and rush away with wild laughter. Arrows drum on shields like hail on a tin roof. Sometimes they find a gap in the armor. Someone screams, falls, wheezes. The formation closes up. You cannot respond. You cannot leave the formation. There is no order to attack. This is a test of discipline that makes blood vessels burst in the eyes. Stand and endure. Stand and watch your comrades bleed out, but do not dare take a step forward, or you will doom everyone. And what are the commanders doing? Pausanias and Mardonius are busy with what can be called religious espionage. Both offer sacrifices. Herodotus describes this with grim irony. The Greek seer Tisamenus slaughters bulls, looks at the liver, and says, "The signs are favorable for defense. If we attack, we lose." In the Persian camp, a Greek defector seer, Hegesistratus, yes, hired prophets were the norm, does the same and tells Mardonius, "Do not attack. Stand on the defensive." The gods seemed to have concluded a non-aggression pact, or simply no one wanted to take responsibility for starting the massacre. 8 days, 10 days. The tension becomes physically palpable. The air between the two armies hums like a taut string, ready to snap and whip faces. The supply of the Greek army begins to falter. Food convoys coming through the passes of Kithaeron are intercepted by Persian cavalry. The Greeks begin to starve. There is almost no water on the heights. The only available source, the Gargaphia spring, is in the lowlands, dangerously close to the enemy. For every sip, one has to pay with the risk of taking an arrow in the neck. Mardonius smells desperation. He sees this giant bronze snake wavering on the slopes. He decides to increase the pressure. Does he order the water poisoned? No, not yet. He does something worse. He insults them. He sends a herald who yells across the valley, addressing the Spartans, "Where is your vaunted bravery? You who claim not to know fear. Why are you hiding in the mountains like frightened women? Come down. Let's settle this dispute honestly, one-on-one, equal number against equal number." The Spartans are silent. This silence is scarier than any scream. Pausanias forbids answering. He knows it is a trap. A fair fight? There are no fair fights in war. There are only victories and defeats. If they come down, they will be destroyed. Pausanias swallows the insults. He allows himself to be called a coward. He allows his men to boil with rage. It is a risk, a huge risk. An army built on a code of honor may mutiny against a commander who does not let them wash away the insult with blood. Arguments begin in the Greek camp. The Athenians demand action. The Megarians complain about their position. The alliance is bursting at the seams. Everyone looks at Pausanias. How will he go down in history? As a genius strategist who waited for the moment? Or as a coward who starved the largest army of Hellas to death without ever unsheathing his sword? And below, in a golden tent, Mardonius loses patience. He is tired of waiting. He is tired of looking at these stubborn barbarians on the rocks. He decides it is time to end the staring game. If the mouse won't come to the cat will smoke it out of its hole. He calls the commander of his elite cavalry, a giant clad in scale armor named Mecistius. The order is simple. Probe them for real. Don't just shoot, but strike. Find a weak link.
Make them twitch.
The sun dips toward sunset on the 11th day. Shadows from the Cithairon mountains crawl onto the valley, covering the Persian camp. But for the Greeks, darkness comes not from the sky. It comes from below. The roar of 1,000 hooves, which at first seems like distant thunder, grows. The earth begins to shake. Mecistius's riders, gleaming with gold and bronze, separate from the Persian mass and rush up the slope, straight toward the positions of the Megarians, the most vulnerable link in the Greek chain. The time of waiting is over. The time for diplomacy has run out. Chess pieces are swept off the table. Now a bloody brawl in the mud begins. And the first blow will fall not on the invincible Spartans, but on those least ready to take it. Feel how the rhythm of the heart changes. Beat. Pause. Beat. This is no longer a drill. This is death galloping toward Greek positions, and it is already here. The blow struck where the armor was thinnest.
The Megarians.
3,000 men from a small trading city, by chance finding themselves on the most dangerous sector of the front, on a gentle slope where the only road from the plain led. It was here, like water bursting a dam, that the Persian cavalry surged. It was not a battle in the usual sense. It was an execution. The Megarians stood in tight formation, spears out. But what use is a spear against an enemy who does not come close? Mecistius's riders circled around them like hornets around a bear. They galloped up, released arrows, and sped away before a heavy Greek javelin could pierce the air. The Megarians died without being able to strike back. Shields turned into pincushions. Men fell, choking on blood, and the formation closed over their bodies, becoming narrower and thinner. A monotonous, maddening whistle of arrows and the thunder of hooves hung in the air. Megarian messengers, dirty, with eyes wide with horror, ran to Pausanias. Their message was simple and terrible as a verdict. We cannot hold. If you do not send help, we will leave. We will simply drop our shields and run. This was the moment when everything could collapse. Panic is contagious. If the Megarians run, a hole will form in the Greek shield wall into which Mardonius's entire army will pour. Pausanias, that cold Spartan cynic, understood. The breach had to be plugged with meat. But whose? Who would voluntarily go under this rain of death? And here the Spartan military machine worked. Or, more precisely, that mixture of pride and discipline on which it rested. A detachment of heavy infantry moved out to help the dying allies. It was the slow, sullen movement of a bronze glacier. They walked down the slope to meet prancing death, knowing that their armor was the only thing separating them from oblivion. In the center of this whirlwind, towering over men and horses, rode Mecistius. The Persian commander was magnificent and terrifying.
He sat on a Nisaean stallion with a golden bridle.
His armor was not just protection, but a work of art. Gold scale over a purple tunic. He was the embodiment of imperial power, a demigod who descended to earth to crush worms. He laughed, looking at the clumsy attempts of the Greeks to reach him. He felt invulnerable. But war hates perfection. War loves chaos and blind chance. An arrow. An ordinary, poorly fletched arrow, released perhaps without even aiming. It did not find a gap in the rider's golden armor. It hit the horse in the flank. The animal reared in pain, went mad, spun around, and crashed to the ground, pinning the rider beneath it. The great Mecistius, commanding the battlefield a second ago, found himself in the mud, pinned by the weight of his own horse. Time froze. The Greeks went numb for a moment. The idol had fallen. And then they rushed at him. It did not look like a noble duel of heroes from the Iliad. It looked like ants swarming a beetle.
A crowd of hoplites surrounded the lying giant. They stabbed him with spears, hacked with swords, beat with shield rims. But Mecistius did not die. The golden scale under the tunic held the blow. He lay there, snapping back like a wounded lion, while the Greeks frantically tried to find a way to kill this monster. The ringing of metal on metal was such that it sounded like blacksmiths hammering on an anvil. Someone figured it out. One of the soldiers saw the only vulnerable spot, the eye. A narrow slit in the helmet through which Mecistius looked at his killers. The sharp end of a spear shaft went into the eye socket, piercing the brain. The golden giant twitched and went still. The Persians, seeing the fall of their commander, went berserk, but not from fear, but from rage. The entire mass of cavalry turned and rushed into the attack to recapture the body. For them, leaving the commander's corpse to the enemy was a shame worse than death. A scrum began, a wild animal scrum around the dead body. Men were trampled by horses, shields cracked. Dust stood so thick that fighters did not see the sun. The Greeks held. They dragged Mecistius's body to their positions like a precious trophy. The Persian cavalry, having lost its leader and will, rolled back. A wail spread across the entire valley. Herodotus writes that the Persians shaved their heads and the manes of their horses in sign of mourning. The crying was so loud that it was heard many stadia away. They had lost not just a commander, they had lost a talisman. And in the Greek camp, euphoria reigned. The fear that had shackled them for weeks vanished. They had done the impossible. They had killed the second man in the Persian army. Mecistius's body, huge and beautiful even in death, was loaded onto a cart. And the strangest parade in history began. The cart creaked, driving along the endless line of the Greek army. Hoplites stepped out of the ranks to look at the dead enemy. They poked fingers at his golden armor, laughed, clapped each other on the shoulders. "Look!" they shouted. "They are mortal! They bleed just like us! We can beat them!" It was a moment of triumph. Dazzling, intoxicating triumph. It seemed to them that the worst was behind them, that victory was already in their pocket. They saw the fleeing backs of Persian riders and thought the war was won. What a monstrous mistake. This small victory became a poison. It poisoned them with overconfidence. They relaxed. They thought the initiative was now in their hands. Pausanias, looking at the jubilant soldiers, gave the command to change position. The army, encouraged by success, descended lower, closer to the plain, to the Gargaphia spring. They needed water, and now they believed they could take it by force. They came out of their stone nests into the open space. They did not understand one thing. Mecistius's death changed nothing in the balance of power.
300,000, or 100,000, what difference does it make?
Persians had not gone anywhere. Mardonius was alive, and he was furious. The Greeks themselves, with their own feet, walked into the kill zone, blinded by the shine of trophy gold. They thought this was the end of the nightmare. In fact, they had just turned the page and opened the chapter where the real slaughter would begin. Laughter over Mecistius's corpse would soon be replaced by the wheezing of parched throats. Because Mardonius, having lost his best cavalryman, decided to change tactics. Enough playing knights. Time to cut the throats of the logistics men. While the Greeks celebrated, the Persian commander looked at the map and smiled. He saw what the success-blinded Greeks did not see. Their stomachs and their canteens
were far more vulnerable than their shields. Euphoria is a drug, and the withdrawal will be terrible. The celebration ended as suddenly as it began.
The euphoria from killing one Persian commander evaporated, leaving behind only the bitter taste of ash and a dry throat. The Greeks, intoxicated by their small triumph, made a fatal mistake. They believed the initiative was in their hands. They descended from the safe but waterless heights closer to the plain, to the Gargaphia spring, assuming they could now dictate terms. But Mardonius was not going to play heroes anymore. Mecistius's death taught him an important lesson. Do not expose your face to a blow if you can stab in the back. The Persian commander switched tactics. He removed the heavy cavalry, ready for frontal attack from the board, and released light horsemen, mobile, elusive, and deadly. He stopped being a warrior and became an engineer of human suffering. He realized that a 100,000-strong Greek army is not just a forest of spears. It is 100,000 stomachs demanding food, and 100,000 throats demanding water. And if the supply umbilical cord is severed, this bronze giant will die on its own, without making a single swing of the sword. The blow was struck not at the phalanx. The blow was struck at the convoy. While the Spartans and Athenians polished their shields at Gargaphia, a Persian detachment flanked their positions and hit the Kathaeron passes, the only thread connecting the army to the rear. It was a massacre, not a battle. 500 wagons with provisions carrying bread and wine for the hungry army were intercepted. The drivers were not taken prisoner. They were killed on the spot, methodically and coldly. The corpses of men and mules clogged the road. The way back was cut off. The supply route was severed. In the Greek camp, everything started to run out. But the scariest thing was not the lack of bread. The scariest thing was thirst. Have you ever tried not drinking for 24 hours in 104-degree heat while in full combat gear? First, the mouth dries out. The tongue swells and becomes like a piece of felt. Then the headache begins, a dull, throbbing pain in the temples that prevents thinking. Then cramps come. Muscles deprived of moisture begin to live their own life, twisting the body into knots. And then madness sets in. Mardonius knew this. He saw the Greeks huddling near the Gargaphia spring, the only place where there was still water. The Asopus River, flowing very close by, was inaccessible. Persian archers had turned its banks into a shooting gallery. Anyone who tried to get water from the river received an arrow. Only the spring remained, a small, pitiful stream on which the lives of tens of thousands of people depended. And then Mardonius delivered his signature blow. He did not capture the spring. He decided to destroy it. Picture this scene. Hundreds of Persian horsemen break through to Gargaphia. They do not attack the Greek formation. They attack the water. They drive horses straight into the spring. Hooves churn up the silt, turning clear water into a dirty brown mess. They fill the spring with stones, earth, animal carcasses. They defecate in it. They make the water undrinkable. It was an act of vandalism that had the strategic significance of a nuclear strike. The Greeks watched this in powerless rage. Heavy infantry could not catch up with horsemen. They stood and watched their life turn into mud. When the Persians galloped away, the spring was no more. There was only a puddle of foul-smelling sludge that was impossible to drink. The situation became critical. The army was trapped. In front, an enemy impossible to attack because he runs away. Behind, mountains swarming with Persian saboteurs. No water, no food, no supplies. Greek commanders gathered for a council, but it was a council of the doomed. Generals screamed at each other with hoarse voices. Spartans accused Athenians. Athenians cursed everyone. Day turned to night, but relief did not come.
Persian cavalry did not let them sleep. They swooped in waves, showering the camp with javelins and arrows. It was torture by insomnia and thirst. Men began to lose their minds. Discipline, that steel rod of the phalanx, began to melt. Soldiers who just yesterday dreamed of glory now dreamed only of one sip of water. They licked condensation from shields, chewed moist grass. Some tried to drink their own urine. The great army of Hellas was turning into a herd of driven cattle. Mardonius proved that logistics kills more effectively than a sword. He didn't even need to engage in a general battle. He just needed to wait a couple more days, and the Greeks would cut each other's throats themselves for a piece of bread or a flask of water. Pausanias understood. This is the end. Staying in place meant death from thirst and arrows. There was no one to attack. The only way out was retreat. A shameful night retreat closer to Plataea, to the foothills, where there might still be streams, and where they could regroup. But giving the order to retreat is one thing. Forcing proud, stubborn, and half-mad from thirst men to execute it is quite another. The plan was simple: withdraw from positions under the cover of night. But in ancient war, simple plans are the surest path to disaster. No one yet knew that this night would go down in history as the Night of Great Chaos. No one knew that the army's salvation would turn into a farce that nearly destroyed all of Western civilization. The sun set, plunging the valley into darkness. Movement began in the camp, but it was not the organized movement of a military machine. It was the beginning of disintegration. Greece, suffocating from thirst, was preparing to perform its most ridiculous and dangerous maneuver. Welcome to the night when discipline died. The plan was perfect, like all plans drawn with a finger in the sand.
At night, under the cover of darkness, the army was to withdraw from positions and move to a place called the Island, a patch of land surrounded by arms of the river, where there was water and protection from cavalry. It was a maneuver of salvation, but as soon as the sun hid behind the mountains of Cithaeron, the discipline of the Greek army disappeared with it. A night began that historians politely call confused, and soldiers would call simply a mess. As soon as the signal to withdraw was given, the center of the Greek army, Corinthians, Megarians, and other allies, did not just retreat. They ran. Fear, accumulating for weeks under shelling, burst the dam. They forgot about formation, about the island, about the order. They just wanted to be as far away from Persian bows as possible. They ran in the dark, stumbling over stones and dropping heavy gear until they reached the walls of the city of Plataea, where in panic they huddled in the courtyard of the Temple of Hera.
They were out of the game, leaving a huge hole in the center of the battle order.
The army split. But if the allies were driven by fear, the Spartans were driven by something worse: pride. On the right flank, where the Spartan elite stood, a scene worthy of the theater of the absurd was taking place. Pausanias gave the order to move out. The Spartans raised their shields, formed into marching columns, and stayed put. The entire huge mechanism froze because of a single gear that refused to turn. The name of this gear was Amumpharetus. Amumpharetus was the commander of a Lokos, a unit of Pitanates. He was a veteran of the old school, a man for whom the code of Lycurgus was more important than reality. He was not present at the war council, and when the order to retreat was relayed to him, he took it as a personal insult. For him, tactical withdrawals did not exist. There existed only two directions: forward to victory, or down into the grave. Only cowards walked backward.
Picture this picture.
Night. Silence, in which the breathing of thousands of people is heard. The entire army waits. Pausanias,
regent of Sparta, the man leading the largest force in the history of Hellas, stands before his subordinate and pleads with him. He cannot simply execute him on the spot. This will provoke a mutiny among the Pitanates loyal to their commander. He tries to explain strategy. He talks about water, about the new position, about tactics. But Amompharetus does not hear arguments. He looks at the regent with the contempt of a fanatic. In his eyes, Pausanias is a traitor defiling the memory of Leonidas. The argument drags on. Time is running out. Every minute of delay brings dawn closer, and with it, inevitable death. The Athenians, who were supposed to cover the retreat, send a messenger to find out why the Spartans are not moving. The messenger sees the incredible. Commanders screaming at each other, waving their arms like fishmongers at a market, while the enemy sleeps a few stadia away from them. The apogee of this madness comes when Amompharetus, having run out of words, moves to action. He bends down, picks up a huge stone from the ground, so heavy that it can barely be held with two hands, and with a crash, throws it at Pausanias's feet. "Here is my voice," he roars. "With this stone, I vote against fleeing from the strangers." In Sparta, decisions were made by voting with pebbles. Amompharetus turned the metaphor into a boulder. This stone became a symbol of dumb, suicidal stubbornness, which is often confused with heroism. He declared that he would not move from the spot, even if the whole world collapsed. Pausanias was furious. He called the commander a madman. But what to do? Leave an elite unit to die? Impossible. Wait? That is suicide for everyone. The argument continued for hours. Imagine the surrealism of what is happening. The fate of Western civilization hangs by a thread because one stubborn officer decided to play at principles in the middle of a night operation. Meanwhile, the sky in the east began to turn gray. The night that was supposed to hide the maneuver was ending. The night crossing plan failed completely. The Greek army did not just fail to take new positions, it fell apart into pieces. The allies were hiding by the Temple of Hera. The Athenians, tired of waiting, began to move independently down into the valley. The Spartans were still standing still, paralyzed by internal conflict. Pausanias made the only possible decision, the decision of a poker player. He gave the command to the rest of the army to move, leaving Amompharetus's detachment alone. He counted on psychology. When the stubborn man sees his comrades leaving, the fear of being left alone will overpower pride. The Spartan column slowly moved away, walking with their backs to the enemy. They walked, looking back. They waited. And it worked. But it worked too late. Amompharetus, left alone in an empty camp, realized he was not just being threatened, he was being abandoned. He ordered his men to raise shields and run to catch up with the main force. They reunited with Pausanias about 10 stadia away at the Moloese stream. But by this moment, the sun had already risen. The morning light mercilessly highlighted the disaster. Instead of a unified front on fortified positions, Mardonius saw scattered bunches of Greeks wandering the hills. The army was torn into 3 isolated parts having no connection with each other. Spartans and Tegeans, about 50,000 men, were stuck on hilly terrain, without the support of Athenians and without allies. They were tired, sleep-deprived, angry, and, most importantly, they were exposed. Mardonius did not believe his eyes. He thought the Greeks were preparing a cunning maneuver, but scouts reported, "They are running. They abandoned positions. They are nothing." The Persian commander laughed out loud. It was the laugh of a man who just won the jackpot. His enemy made every mistake that could be made. The Greeks themselves exposed their backs to the blow. "They are running!" Mardonius shouted to his officers.
Didn't I tell you these Spartans are cowards? Where is their vaunted valor? Look, they are leaving without accepting battle. In pursuit, we will slaughter them like sheep." The order was given instantly. The Persian army came into motion. It was not an orderly advance of phalanxes. It was a hunt. Horsemen, infantry, archers, everyone rushed forward, crossing the Aesopus. They did not form into battle order. They just ran, screaming and hooting, to manage to grab their piece of loot. It seemed to them that the battle was already won. Only the fugitives remained to be finished off. Pausanias, standing on a hill, saw the horizon fill with an avalanche of enemies. He saw the dust raised by thousands of hooves. He heard this roar, like the noise of an approaching tsunami. His army was disorganized. His flanks were open. His men were exhausted by the night vigil. Amompharetus with his stone got what he wanted. There was nowhere to retreat. Now only one thing remained: to stand and die. The dispute about honor was over. The massacre under the silence of the gods began. The morning that was supposed to bring salvation brought death. The sun rose over the Cathaeron ridge to illuminate a scene that would make any strategist's blood run cold. The Greek army was torn apart. The Athenians disappeared into the lowlands, the allies hid by the walls of Plataea, and the Spartans and Tegeans, the core of Hellas's military power, remained alone on the open hills. They were naked in the face of the storm, and the storm did not keep them waiting. Mardonius did not bother arranging beautiful lines. He saw prey and released the dogs. The Persian infantry crossed the Aesopus River not in an orderly march, but as a running avalanche. They screamed, whistled, and rattled weapons. It was the sound of approaching chaos. First came not swordsmen, but archers and shield-bearers. They approached to shooting range and stuck their huge wicker shields, spada, into the ground. In minutes, a wall grew in front of the Greek formation, a wall from behind which death flew out with the buzzing of angry wasps. The barrage began. These were not single shots. It was a monsoon. Thousands, tens of thousands of arrows soared into the sky, eclipsing the sun for a second, and fell down with a dry, disgusting thud. Thud, thud, thud. They struck the bronze of helmets, pierced the leather of shields, found unprotected necks and thighs. The Spartan phalanx is an organism created to go forward and crush. But now it stood. Pausanias, standing behind the formation, did not give the order to attack. Instead of a sword, in his hands was a knife for sacrifices. Next to him, priests were gutting goats. They were looking in the smoking entrails for a sign from the gods, approval for murder. But the gods were silent, or laughing. "The liver is black!" shouted the seer, shouting over the whistle of arrows. "No lobe! The signs are unfavorable. Do not move!" Can you imagine this level of madness? 50,000 armed men, the best killers of their time, stand under a rain of sharpened sticks and watch their comrades fall dead, just because a piece of meat looks wrong. It was discipline raised to an absolute, discipline bordering on collective suicide. They were forbidden to raise spears. They were forbidden even to defend themselves. The Spartans went down on one knee, covering themselves with shields, turning into bronze turtles. They sat and waited. Through the slits in the shields, they saw the Persians coming closer. They saw their smirks. They saw the barbarians methodically choosing targets, as if on a shooting range. It was torture by helplessness. The most beautiful man in the entire Greek army, the Spartan Callicrates, died exactly like this.
He did not manage to strike a single blow. An arrow pierced his side while he was simply standing in formation. Dying, he said to the man standing next to him, "I do not regret dying for Greece, but I regret that I did not use my hands and did not accomplish anything worthy." His words became the epitaph of this morning. Mountains of corpses grew. Blood mixed with dust, turning dry earth into a dirty mess. The wounded moaned, but the formation did not budge. The living closed ranks, covering the voids left by the dead with themselves. They stood like statues being hit with a hammer. Every heartbeat was a lottery. Will it hit or not? Pausanias was in despair.
He looked at the temple of Hera, visible in the distance, raised his hands to the sky,
and wept. Yes, the stern Spartan commander sobbed, begging the goddess to stop this slaughter and give at least some sign. It was a moment of truth for the entire Spartan system. Which is stronger? The instinct of self-preservation demanding to rush at the enemy and tear him apart with bare hands? Or submission to orders beaten in since childhood and fear of the divine? The Persians, seeing the passivity of the Greeks, became completely brazen. They dropped their wicker shields and came right up close. They began shooting point blank. Some just threw stones at the Greeks, mocking their immobility. To Mardonius's warriors, this looked like cowardice. They thought the Spartans were paralyzed with fear. They did not understand that they were looking at a spring being compressed to its breaking point. Inside every Spartan, lava boiled. Imagine the rage one must suppress when being spat at, stoned, and shot at like a target. The grinding of thousands of men's teeth was heard even through the roar of battle. The Tegeans, neighbors of the Spartans in the line, began to grumble. They were not bound by such iron discipline. They looked at Pausanias with wild eyes, demanding, begging for an order. "How much longer?" was read in their gazes. "How much longer will we be meat?" The air trembled with tension. This was no longer a battle of tactics. It was psychological torture. Seconds stretched into hours. Death walked between the ranks, gathering its harvest, and no one dared raise a hand against it. It seemed that in another moment, the army would simply explode from within from overexertion. Either they would run, and then Greece would perish, or they would go mad and rush into attack without orders, violating sacred laws. Pausanias slaughtered an animal once again. Blood splashed onto his armor.
he bent over the entrails while death whistled around.
All eyes, of the living and the dying, were fixed on his hands. The life of an entire nation depended on how the spots on the liver of a dead goat lay. The Persian infantry was already preparing for a decisive rush to finish off these strange, motionless idols. They already tasted victory, tasted easy blood. They did not know they were standing on the threshold of a volcano that was about to wake up. The gods were silent, but the people had already reached the limit. The silence became unbearable, and then, finally, the heavens answered. Or maybe Pausanias simply realized that if he delayed another second, his own men would impale him on spears instead of the Persians. The priest, digging in the entrails of yet another victim, suddenly raised a bloody head and nodded. The signs are favorable. The path to murder is open. At that moment happened what the Persians feared so much without knowing it. The spring that had been compressed for hours under a hail of arrows snapped. Giant energy accumulated in thousands of bodies sought an outlet. Pausanias gave the order, and 50,000 throats exhaled a single, bestial roar that seemed to crack the stones on the slopes of Kytheron. The phalanx came into motion. It was not graceful fencing. It was an avalanche coming down. Spartans and Tegeans, enraged, humiliated by the long wait, rushed forward. They didn't run. You can't run much in heavy armor. They gathered momentum. A step, another, a third, and now a bronze wall is rushing at the enemy with the inexorability of a freight train whose brakes have failed. The Persians, standing behind their wicker spara shields, at first did not believe their eyes. Just now these Greeks were sitting like beaten dogs, and now a forest of sharp stings was bearing down on them. Persian archers tried to intensify the shelling, but it was too late. Arrows bounced off shields on the run, causing no harm. The distance closed rapidly. Impact. The sound of two armies colliding was heard for many stadia. It was not the ringing of swords. It was a dull, sickening crunch. The sound with which heavy metal crashes into soft flesh and fragile wood. The Greek phalanx crashed into the Persian formation with the physics of a battering ram. Here, in this bloody press, the fate of the war was decided. And it was decided not by valor, but by technology. Mardonius brought the best warriors of Asia to the battlefield, but he did not give them the right tools. Persian shields were woven from willow twigs. They protected perfectly against arrows, but against a heavy Greek dory spear, hitting with the momentum of a running man, they were as useless as paper. Spears punched through shields, punched through linen cuirasses, punched through bodies, and came out of backs. The first line of Persians simply disappeared. It was smeared, trampled into the mud by the bronze greaves of hoplites. The Spartans worked silently, coherently, like butchers on a conveyor belt. Spear thrust from the hip, jerk back, step forward, thrust, thrust, thrust. It was mechanical, industrial death. No emotions, only cold efficiency. They were taking revenge for Thermopylae, for burned Athens, for every minute of standing under arrows. But the Persians did not run. Herodotus, who usually does not favor barbarians, takes off his hat to them here. They fought with the desperation of the doomed. When their short Akinakes swords proved useless against long spears, they dropped their weapons. They grabbed Greek spears with bare hands. They tried to break the shafts, hanging on them with their whole weight. They threw themselves on shields, trying to knock over hoplites with the weight of their bodies. Picture this scene. A Persian, pierced by a spear, grabs the shaft, pulls himself closer to the killer to try to stab him in the neck with a dagger at the last moment. It was the madness of the brave, crashing against a wall of professionals. Spartans did not engage in duels. If a Persian grabbed a spear, the Spartan's neighbor killed him. The phalanx was a single organism that had thousands of hands, but one brain. The immortals entered the battle, the king's personal guard, the elite of the empire, the very ones who surrounded Leonidas a year ago. They were magnificent. But here, on a flat surface, in a fair, or unfair, depending on how you look at it, head-on collision, their skill was worth nothing. Their beautiful scale armor was pierced as easily as peasant shirts. A Greek hoplite was encased in bronze from head to toe. A Persian had almost his entire face and limbs exposed. It was a slaughter of unequals. The ground became slippery. Blood did not have time to soak into the dry soil, forming puddles in which sandals slipped. The air filled with a smell that cannot be confused with anything. A mixture of copper dust, ripped guts, and sweat. The crowding was such that the dead did not fall. They remained standing, wedged between the living, continuing to go into the attack together with their unit. The Spartans pressed, step by step, they pushed the Persians to the river. The Tegeans on the flank hacked with the same fury. The entire Persian front line began to buckle. The wall of shields that Mardonius built turned into splinters. The Greeks entered close combat, where their short Xephos swords began their harvest. They struck faces, necks, groins. They turned people into pieces of meat. It was payback. For the fear of the night retreat, for the thirst, for the humiliation. Now the Spartans were in their element. They were predators who finally got to the victim's throat.
And they were not going to let go while it breathed. The wrath of Leonidas, accumulated for a whole year, spilled out onto the plain of Plataea, and this wrath was terrible. It was not war, it was extermination. The Persian army, sure of victory an hour ago, now realized it was locked in a cage with an enraged bear, and there was no way out of this cage. In the center of this bloody vortex, where bronze ground flesh, remained one island of resistance. It shone with whiteness and gold amidst a sea of mud and blood. It was Mardonius. The Persian commander-in-chief did not hide in the rear. Unlike his king Xerxes, who watched Salamis from a golden throne on a safe hill, Mardonius was a warrior. He sat on a snow-white Nisaean steed, towering over the battle like a beacon. Around him rallied 1,000 of the empire's best horsemen, his personal guard, the flower of Persian nobility. Mardonius understood that the battle was slipping away. He saw his infantry, deprived of long spears, dying on Spartan shields. And he did what any hero of an epic would do. He tried to turn the tide of history with personal courage. He threw his elite detachment straight into the thick of the fight, to where the Spartans pressed hardest. It was a furious, desperate attack. Persian horsemen hacked into the ranks of hoplites, dealing blows right and left. Mardonius himself fought like a possessed man. He killed Greeks one after another. His sword was red with blood. For a moment, it seemed the Persians might hold. As long as the commander is alive, as long as his plume waves, the army has a heart, the army has a will. But ancient war is not a duel of honor. It is an industry of death. There is no place here for beautiful duels, where opponents exchange lines before the decisive blow. The fate of the empire was decided not by a noble duel of equals, but by a brutal, ugly accident. A Spartan named Amnestus, a man about whom history remembered only this single fact, did not seek glory. He was just doing his job. He saw a rider on a white horse who shouted too loudly and killed too many. Amnestus did not challenge him to a fight. He picked up a heavy stone from the ground, or maybe shifted his spear more comfortably, and struck. The blow was terrible. No magic, no poetry, just a piece of matter launched with monstrous force met a human head. Mardonius's helmet, decorated with gold, did not hold. The skull of the great general, the man who dreamed of becoming the satrap of Greece, split like an overripe watermelon. The light in his eyes went out instantly. The body, which a second ago was the focus of power over hundreds of thousands of people, fell like a sack from the horse into the dust under hooves. And in that second, something broke on the battlefield. It was the sound of a snapped string that all of Asia heard. The Persians surrounding Mardonius froze. Their god died. Their leader, who promised them loot and glory, lay in the mud with a crushed head. And if the shepherd died, what should the flock do? The answer was one: run. The heroism of the Persian guard evaporated instantly. They did not avenge their commander like the Greeks avenged Leonidas.
they broke. Panic spread faster than the plague. The news of Mardonius's death flew through the ranks of the Persian army with the speed of a forest fire. "Mardonius is dead! It's all over! Save yourselves!" The huge multilingual horde, assembled from dozens of conquered nations, suddenly remembered that it had no reason to die on this foreign, rocky land. The connecting thread of fear of authority snapped. Only animal terror before Spartan spears remained. The formation crumbled. 300,000 men, or however many were left there, turned into an uncontrollable mob. They dropped shields, bows, banners. They turned and ran.
It was no longer an army. It was a stream of crazed flesh striving away from the bronze demons of Sparta. They crushed each other in panic, trampled the wounded, screamed in 100 languages. And then the second main character of the Persian tragedy entered the stage, Artabazus, a commander who from the very beginning hated Mardonius and considered this war a mistake. He had 40,000 fresh soldiers under his command, a huge force that could have hit the Spartans in the flank and possibly changed the outcome of the day, or at least covered the retreat. But Artabazus was a cynic and a pragmatist. He watched the battle from a safe distance. When he saw Mardonius fall and the others run, he didn't lift a finger to help. He smirked. His rival was dead, and that suited him just fine. "Turn around," he commanded his officers. "We are leaving, not to the wooden camp where we will be slaughtered like rats. We are going home." To Phocis, and from there to the Hellespont. 40,000 men turned and marched off the battlefield in formation, without even unsheathing their swords. Artabazus simply stole the Persians' last chance for salvation, saving his own skin and his personal army. It was betrayal, but brilliant betrayal. He is the only one of the Persian generals who will return home alive and with an army. And for the rest, hell began. The main mass of fleeing Persians rushed to their wooden fortified camp. They hoped the walls would save them. They crowded into narrow gates, creating traffic jams of living bodies. Spartans and Tegeans followed in their footsteps, methodically killing everyone who lagged behind. They advanced on a carpet of corpses. It was the collapse of hopes, the collapse of an empire, the death of one man. The vain, brave, foolish Mardonius brought down a colossus on clay feet. Tyranny rests on fear and the figure of a leader. Remove the leader, and slaves will remember that they are just people who want to live. The Greek phalanx, consisting of free citizens, withstood the loss of Leonidas and continued to fight. The Persian horde, having lost its master, ceased to exist as a military force. The dust of flight veiled the sun. Xerxes' great army, the terror of the world, turned into game for which hunting season had opened. Spartans, covered in blood from head to toe, walked forward, stepping over golden armor and abandoned banners. They walked toward the wooden fort, where the remnants of the enemy army trembled with fear, awaiting the inevitable. The battle was over. The execution was beginning. What happened next is hard to call a battle. It was more like the slaughter of cattle on an industrial scale. The remnants of the Persian army, crazed with horror, made their last fatal mistake. They did not scatter into the mountains, where they would have had a chance to survive one by one. The herd instinct worked. They huddled together and locked themselves in their huge wooden fortified camp. They thought the walls would save them. In fact, they nailed the lid of their own coffin shut. The Spartans approached the walls first. But here is the irony of fate. The best warriors in the world, capable of killing anyone in an open field, were absolutely helpless against walls. Sparta did not know how to take fortifications by storm. They poked spears at logs, roared with impotence, but could not break inside. Persians from the walls showered them with arrows, feeling a false sense of security. It seemed the siege might drag on. But then the Athenians arrived. The very Athenians who had disappeared into the lowlands in the morning, and whom many had already written off. They were not only sailors, but also engineers. For them, a wooden wall was not an obstacle, but a task. They attacked the fortifications with fury and skill.
Logs cracked, fortifications flew into splinters. The Athenians breached the wall, and into this breach, like water into the hold of a sinking ship, poured Tegeans and Spartans.
Inside the camp, a crush began. Imagine tens of thousands of people locked in a limited space. They have nowhere to run. They are crowded. They are pressed against each other so tightly that many cannot even raise a hand with a weapon. And into this dense, sweaty, screaming mass crashes the Greek death machine. The Greeks took no prisoners. There was no order to spare. There was only a thirst for blood, accumulated over a year of humiliation, for burned temples, for fear, for dead friends. It was the disposal of enemy manpower. Swords worked without stopping. People fell but did not reach the ground, supported by the bodies of comrades. The floor underfoot turned into slippery, squelching mush where it was impossible to stand.
Herodotus cites figures that are scary to believe, but even scarier to imagine might be true.
Of the 300,000 men who came with Mardonius, minus Artabazus's 40,000 deserters, fewer than 3,000 remained alive. Think about that. This is not a victory. This is genocide. This is total annihilation. An entire culture, an entire generation of warriors of the East was slaughtered in a few hours in this wooden pen. The air was so thick with the smell of blood and ripped bellies that it was impossible to breathe. The Greeks killed until their hands refused to hold weapons from fatigue. When the screams died down, silence fell. The silence of the dead. The camp was a mountain of mangled flesh. Among the corpses lay treasures the Persians had brought with them. Tents embroidered with gold, bowls, jewelry, expensive furniture. Beggarly Greek peasants and soldiers walked ankle-deep in blood among riches that would be enough to buy their entire country. And right here, in the midst of this apocalypse, occurred a scene that defines the difference between barbarism and civilization better than any philosophy book. A nobleman from the island of Aegina named Lampon approached Pausanias standing among the corpses. He was drunk with victory and craved revenge. He pointed to Mardonius's body, found among the dead, and said, "O Pausanias, you have done a great deed, but to make your glory immortal, do one more thing. When Leonidas fell at Thermopylae, Mardonius and Xerxes cut off his head and mounted it on a stake. Avenge them. Cut off Mardonius's head and do the same. All of Sparta and all of Greece will praise you." It was a temptation to sink to the enemy's level, to answer cruelty with cruelty, an eye for an eye. Pausanias looked at him with a cold, heavy gaze. He wiped his bloody sword and replied with words that should be carved in granite. "You advise me to act as barbarians do, not Greeks. We defeated them precisely because we are better. I do not make war on the dead. Leonidas is already avenged. He is avenged by these mountains of corpses around us. This payment is sufficient." He ordered the enemy's body not to be touched. At that moment, standing in mud and blood, Pausanias won his main victory. Not over the Persians, but over himself, over the beast within. The West defeated the East not only with a spear, but also with spirit. The refusal to desecrate a corpse became the line that separated free men from slaves of tyranny. The Battle of Plataea was over. The Persian threat hanging over Europe was eliminated. Greece was free. But at what cost? Look at this field. Tens of thousands of corpses, with no one to bury them. The stench of decay that will hang over Boeotia for months. Ruined cities, burned villages, widows and orphans. This is not a pretty picture from a textbook. This is the ugly, dirty, nauseating reality of war.
And now ask yourself the main question. Why do you know about Thermopylae, but have heard almost nothing about Plataea? Why did 300 losing Spartans become a legend about which blockbusters are made, while tens of thousands of victors who staged the largest massacre of antiquity are forgotten? The answer is simple and cynical. Thermopylae is a beautiful tragedy. It is romance, heroic death, self-sacrifice, clean clothes, lofty words. It is a myth that is convenient to sell. But Plataea is the truth. It is chaos, command errors, cowardice of allies, betrayal, thirst, dirt, and the merciless slaughter of the defenseless in the finale. In Thermopylae, the Greeks lost beautifully. In Plataea, they won ugly. We love martyrs, but we are ashamed of executioners, even if those executioners saved us. The victory at Plataea saved Western civilization. If the Greeks had lost here, the Parthenon would never have been built. Socrates would not have asked his questions. Roman law would not have arisen. And the world we know would be completely different. We are all children of this bloody slaughter. But history is selective memory. It erases dirt and leaves only shine. We remember Leonidas because he died standing tall. We forgot Pausanias because he survived, won, and then, years later, went mad with power and was killed by his own fellow citizens. Plataea is a reminder that real victory is never sterile. Freedom is not given for free and is not won in white gloves. It is gnawed out with teeth. It smells of sweat, fear, and iron. It stands on mountains of corpses. And sometimes, to save the light, one must dip one's hands up to the elbows in darkness. So, the next time you hear about the 300 Spartans, remember the thousands of nameless killers at Plataea. Remember their fear, their rage, and their work. Because it was they who gave you the right to remember. This was Plataea, the forgotten slaughter that saved the West.